The evening air around the community hall felt cool and calm, but inside the young woman's chest everything was tight and restless. She walked toward the entrance with careful steps, holding her old music folder close as if it could protect her from the noise of the world. The building wasn't big, just a simple hall used for local events. But tonight it felt like a place where every eye could turn into a judge. She took a small breath before she pushed the door open. The moment she stepped inside, warm lights and soft chatter filled the space. People were gathered in small groups, laughing, tuning instruments, or sipping drinks as they waited for the performances to begin. She stood there quietly, trying to make herself smaller as she looked around for a seat. She didn't know anyone in the room, and she already felt as if her presence was a mistake. As she walked along the side of the room, two people near the back glanced at her. She didn't look back, but their voices floated just loud enough for her to hear. "Is she performing?" One whispered, "I doubt it. Maybe she's lost." The other replied. A small laugh followed. She lowered her eyes and tightened her hold on the folder. She had told herself she wouldn't let comments get to her tonight, but it was hard. She wasn't dressed like the others. Her clothes were plain, her shoes worn from daily use, and her hair was tied in a simple way. She hadn't come to impress anyone with appearance. She had come for something else, something personal. She found a seat in a corner, far from the groups chatting loudly. She placed her music folder on her lap and gently traced the edge of the paper inside. The sheet music wasn't even printed from a nice machine. It was a faded copy someone had given her years ago, and she had practiced it over and over until her hands could find the keys without thinking. She wasn't here to win anything. She just wanted to try, to see if she could stand in front of people and let the music speak for her. On stage, a man with a guitar finished tuning and began playing a calm song. The audience listened politely. Some nodded with the rhythm. Some spoke softly among themselves. It was a relaxed event, nothing formal, nothing high pressure, but to her, it felt bigger than anything she had faced. She watched each performer with quiet admiration. Some were confident, some shy, some playful. She liked seeing different people express themselves. It made her feel less alone, knowing they all stood on stage with their own doubts and hopes. She wondered if anyone would understand why she came here. Most people thought performing was about showing off talent or chasing applause. But for her, it was about proving something to herself, something she had struggled with for years. From the side of the room, she heard another voice. This one slightly amused. She brought her own music folder. "Cute. Probably thinks she's ready for something big." A few laughs followed. She stared at her hands, feeling a quiet sting. She didn't know why people assumed things so quickly. They didn't know how many nights she spent practicing on an old keyboard with a broken stand. They didn't know she had saved for months just to get that keyboard repaired, so she could continue learning. They didn't know how long she had wanted to play in front of anyone, but never found the courage. She took a slow breath. She reminded herself that none of them knew her story, and none of them had the power to decide her future. She was here for her own reasons. She tried to relax her shoulders and listen to the music on stage. The performance ended with gentle applause. The host stepped forward and thanked the performer. Then he scanned his list, checking the next name. Suddenly, one of the volunteers hurried up to the host and spoke quietly. The host nodded, looked at the audience, and announced, "It seems our next performer had to leave due to an urgent matter, so we have an open slot right now. If anyone wants to step in, feel free to come up. This is a community night, after all." There was a brief silence. People looked around, but no one moved. Some whispered, some shrugged. It wasn't often that a spot opened so casually. The woman felt her heartbeat jump. This was the moment she had pictured in her mind before coming here, an unexpected chance. She hesitated, thinking of the whispers, the amused looks, the doubt that surrounded her. But then she remembered the promise she silently made to herself. If an opportunity appeared, she would not run away again. Her hand rose slowly. Not dramatic, not confident, just a small gesture that she hoped someone would notice. The host spotted her and smiled kindly. "Would you like to perform?" Before she could answer, a few people nearby chuckled. "She's really going to try?" someone said. Another voice added, "This should be interesting." Her cheeks warmed, but she didn't lower her hand. She simply nodded. The host gestured her forward. "Come on up. We're happy to have you." She stood, her legs feeling a little stiff. The walk toward the stage felt long, as if every step was seen by every person in the room. She could feel the mixed reactions. Some looked curious, some doubtful, some uninterested. No one expected anything from her, And maybe that was the one thing that gave her strength. With expectations so low, she had nowhere to fall. She reached the steps of the stage, holding her music folder tightly. The piano sat there waiting, its polished surface reflecting the lights. She hadn't played on a real piano in years. Most of her practice had been on a keyboard with missing keys and dull sound. Seeing the piano up close made her chest tighten again, but not from fear, more from hope. She placed her folder on top of the piano and took a moment to breathe. The room quieted slightly. Maybe they were curious now. Maybe they were still doubtful. She didn't look up to check. She kept her eyes on the keys, the familiar pattern that had guided her through so many long nights. The whispers started again, soft but noticeable. Does she even know what she's doing? She looks nervous. This might be awkward. Someone snorted lightly, trying not to laugh. She let the words float past her like wind. She steadied her hands, placing them on the keys gently. She wasn't starting yet. She was just letting herself feel the instrument, letting herself reconnect with something she loved. The hall grew more settled. Conversations lowered. Chairs shifted. People waited. Unsure of what to expect, she looked at her sheet music one more time. The faded notes, the worn edges, the marks she made during practice, all of it felt like a small piece of her life, resting there on the stand. Then she closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured her tiny room where she practiced. She pictured the way the music helped her breathe whenever life felt heavy. She pictured the quiet moments when she was alone with the notes, learning them slowly, sometimes getting frustrated, sometimes smiling at small improvements. The memory steadied her. She opened her eyes, took one more gentle breath, and prepared her fingers. She wasn't sure how the performance would go. She wasn't sure if people would listen. But she knew one thing clearly: she came here to try. And she wouldn't back away just because a few people doubted her. If anything, their doubt fueled her more. And now, sitting at the piano, hands ready, she felt something inside her settle. Whatever happened next, she would play from the heart. The moment she sat at the piano, something inside her felt both light and heavy at the same time. The room wasn't silent yet, but the low chatter faded enough that she could sense dozens of eyes watching her every small move. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't want their expressions to affect her before she even began. Instead, she focused on the keys, on the cool surface beneath her fingertips, on the simple reminder that she had come here for a reason. A soft tap of the host's microphone echoed through the hall as he stepped aside to give her space. Someone near the front leaned back in their chair, whispering to the person beside them. The two exchanged a quick laugh. She heard it, but she didn't let it sink into deeply. If she let every sound discourage her, she would never start. She took a quiet breath, then another, trying to steady the mix of hope and fear inside her. This wasn't like practicing at home. There, she could play the same line 100 times if she needed. Here, she had only one chance, one moment, one attempt to show something honest. She lifted her hands, just slightly above the keys, when a sudden voice from the audience broke the building calm. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Someone called out, half joking, half mocking. A few people chuckled. Her hands froze mid-air. The sound stung her confidence sharply, like a sudden cold wind. She swallowed once, keeping her face steady. She didn't look at the person who said it. If she looked, the hurt might show, and she didn't want that. The host gently raised his hand toward the audience. "Let's give her a chance, please," he said, his voice calm. The laughter stopped, but the weight of the comment stayed with her. Still, she lowered her hands slowly and placed them on the keys again. The piano felt warm now, almost as if it were waiting to help her. For a moment, she didn't move. She let silence sit comfortably, holding onto it until she could breathe without shaking. The hall, unexpectedly, began to settle. Maybe they sensed she needed a second. Maybe they simply grew curious. Whatever the reason, the small pause allowed her to gather herself again. She pressed the first key. The sound was soft, almost too gentle, but it stretched through the hall like a thin thread, pulling everyone's attention toward her. She followed with another note, shaping the opening of the melody with careful control. Her fingers moved slowly, adjusting, feeling out the instrument's strength and tone. At first, some people still shifted in their seats or whispered quietly. A few didn't take her seriously yet, but she kept playing, letting the notes fill her space like a shield. As she continued, her hands began to relax. Her shoulders loosened. The earlier sting of doubt faded little by little. Her heart still beat fast, but now it matched the rhythm of the piece, guiding her instead of overwhelming her. With each measure, she found more steadiness, She moved gently into the next part of the melody, adding depth to the sound. The hall grew quieter, not silent, not completely, but quieter in a way that told her people were slowly paying attention. But just as the music was rising, another voice slipped in from the back. "She's trying too hard," someone murmured. The comment wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to reach her. Her fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second, causing a tiny stumble in the melody. Her stomach tightened. She could almost imagine their faces, doubtful, amused, dismissive. Her instinct was to shrink inward, to pull her hands away and leave the stage before she embarrassed herself more. But then she remembered the nights she played alone, when no one believed in her except herself. She remembered how every mistake she made during practice only pushed her to try again. And she remembered why she came, not for approval, but for courage. So she kept going. She let the mistake dissolve into the next phrase and built her focus again. Her hands found their rhythm. Her breathing found its steadiness. The piano, rich and warm, supported her with every touch. Slowly, the whispers faded. The room shifted from mild curiosity to genuine attention. People leaned forward just a little. Some stopped their side conversations. The earlier smirks softened as the melody grew fuller. The performance was not perfect, not polished like those who trained for years with formal lessons, but it was honest. It carried a kind of quiet strength, something shaped by long nights, small rooms, and steady perseverance. She moved into the middle section of the piece, which was always the hardest part for her. At home, she had stumbled through it countless times before finally learning the flow. Now, under so many watching eyes, the pressure increased. But she didn't rush. She let each note settle before reaching for the next. Her fingers trembled slightly when she reached the part that always challenged her the most. But she kept control, shaping the sound with care. She felt the room leaning toward the music, not away from it. Then, unexpectedly, she sensed something shift in the audience. Not in sound, but in energy. A calmness settled where doubt once hovered. Someone in the front row placed a hand over their mouth as if surprised. A person who had laughed earlier now sat still, watching her intently. It encouraged her. She let the music rise, giving the melody a little more strength. Her confidence grew with the sound. The tremble in her fingers reduced. Her back straightened slightly. Her breathing matched the movement of her hands. For the first time tonight, she felt like she wasn't just trying to play well, she was living through the music. Memories filled her mind as she played. The tiny room where she practiced. The way she used to place a small lamp beside the keyboard so she could see the keys late at night. The quiet moments when she would pause, listening to imperfect notes, but still choosing to continue. She remembered telling herself that music would be her way of speaking when words felt too heavy. She remembered thinking that one day she would play in front of others, even if no one expected her to. And now she was here, playing in front of strangers who had doubted her. Strangers who whispered and laughed when she walked in. But the music was slowly wiping away their assumptions. By the time she reached the softer part of the piece, something warm filled her chest. Not pride exactly, but relief that she hadn't walked away when she had the chance to. Relief that she had lifted her hand earlier even though her heart felt unsteady. The melody softened, floating through the hall like a gentle breath. People listened quietly now. No one whispered. No one laughed. The earlier mockery had faded entirely. She reached the final notes of this section, letting them fade naturally. She didn't rush. She didn't force anything. She simply let the music settle into the silence that followed. The hall remained perfectly still. She took a small breath. Her hands hovered again, waiting for the transition to the final part of the piece. This was where the emotion gathered, where the music carried the weight of everything she felt, but never said. She looked at the keys for a moment, letting her thoughts steady. Then she continued. Her hands moved with more confidence now, her touch fuller. The melody grew richer, rising and expanding through the hall. She didn't think about the people watching. She didn't think about the doubts thrown at her. All she thought about was the promise she made to herself to try, no matter what. To keep going, even if her hands shook. To face the room, even if no one believed she could. And now, as she played the final line of the piece, the hall felt completely different from when she first stepped inside. There was no noise, no laughter, no whispers. Only music, only her, and the quiet understanding that she had begun to change the room, one note at a time. The final note of the last section faded away slowly, almost like it didn't want to leave the air around her. She lifted her fingers from the keys with care, letting the sound settle into the room. For a moment, there was no movement anywhere. Not from her, not from the audience. It was one of those rare moments where the world seemed to pause without warning. She took a small breath, barely more than a sigh, as the quiet wrapped around her. She felt her heartbeat echo softly in her chest, steady but full of emotion she couldn't describe in words. This was the part of the piece that always made her feel something deep, something she couldn't explain, something she couldn't ignore. She placed her fingers gently back on the keys and began the next notes. This part of the piece was slower, softer, almost like a confession. Each note carried something honest. It didn't demand attention. It simply spoke for itself. And as soon as she began playing it, she sensed something shift again in the room. People weren't just listening now, they were feeling it. She didn't look up to check. She didn't want to risk breaking her concentration, but she felt it in the stillness of the hall. The earlier tension, whispers, and doubts had been replaced by something else. Something she had never expected to come from this crowd. Respect. She kept playing, letting her hands move with more confidence than she had at the start. At home, this part of the music always reminded her why she kept going even when things were difficult. She thought of the nights she sat alone with her small lamp on, playing the same lines until the sky outside started turning light. She remembered how she would sometimes fall asleep on the chair, her fingers resting on the keys, too tired to move. Those memories slipped through her thoughts as she played, not distracting her but guiding her. Every note felt like a piece of those quiet nights resurfacing. Here, in this hall, surrounded by people who once doubted her, she finally felt seen, not because she demanded it, but because her music carried her truth forward without asking for anything. As she reached the middle of this section, her confidence grew stronger. Her hands moved more freely. Her breathing felt calmer. She felt connected not just to the piano, but to the room itself. She didn't imagine applause or praise. She didn't think about whether people liked her or not. All she cared about was giving everything she had to this moment. The piano responded to her touch with warmth. The rich tone filled the space with gentle strength. The sound seemed to wrap around the people sitting there, pulling them into her story without needing any words. For a moment, she forgot about the earlier laughter. The doubts that had been thrown her way felt far away now, like echoes from another time. All that remained was the music. Her fingers slowed as she transitioned into the next part, which had always been her favorite. It carried a mix of sorrow and hope, to feelings she had known well in her life. She leaned slightly closer to the keys as she played, letting the emotions flow through her hands. The audience stayed completely silent. No shuffling, no whispering, no laughter. Only the soft breaths of people who were listening more carefully than she ever thought they would. She let the melody rise a little, adding a tender intensity to it. Her chest tightened as she played, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she had carried to reach this moment. Every struggle she had faced, every moment she had doubted herself, every voice that told her she wasn't enough, it all shaped the sound that flowed from her fingertips now. When she reached the part where the music opened up with a brighter tone, she felt something warm inside her, something almost like relief. The notes were uplifting but still gentle, like sunlight after days of cloudy weather. She let herself feel it fully. She kept playing, and somewhere in the middle of the piece, her eyes softened. She wasn't just performing anymore, she was speaking through the music in a way she never could through words. She hoped the audience understood, even if just a little. Halfway through this section, she heard the quietest shift in the room. Someone in the back let out a soft breath, almost like they were moved. She didn't turn to look, but the sound gave her strength. Her confidence grew with every passing measure. She felt lighter, stronger, more certain of why she had chosen to come here tonight. It wasn't about proving people wrong. It wasn't even about proving herself right. It was about giving herself the chance she had always been too afraid to take. As the piece moved forward, her hands guided the melody with new depth. Every small movement carried her story. She didn't need fancy clothes or fame or praise. All she needed was this piano, this music, and this one moment where she didn't hold back. Near the end of the section, the music softened again. She let her fingers move slowly, with care, drawing the room back into a gentle quiet. This was the part where everything came together: the doubt, the courage, the quiet nights, the lonely practices. She carried all of it in her hands. The hall remained still, like it didn't want to disturb her. Even the lights above seemed dimmer, softer, as if trying to match the emotion in her playing. Then she reached the transition into the last part of the piece. A soft pause sat between the closing notes and the next movement. This pause was small but powerful. It gave her a moment to breathe. She lifted her hands slightly and let the moment stretch. Her eyes lowered to the keys, not from fear but from focus. She knew the final part of the music held the deepest emotion. It would not be loud or dramatic. It would be honest, simple, and full of meaning. She pressed the first note of the next movement, and the sound opened gently, like a quiet confession. Her hands moved in a slow pattern, shaping each note carefully. Her heart beat steadily, but she felt every emotion rushing through her. This was the part of the piece that meant the most to her. Whenever she played it at home, she always closed her eyes for a moment, letting the notes wash through her like a soft rain. She didn't close her eyes here, but she felt the same emotion rising inside her. The room stayed completely still. She didn't need to see the audience to know they were listening with full attention. The silence they gave her was the greatest sign of respect she had received all night. As she played the gentle rise of the melody, she could almost feel the room breathing with her. Every note felt like a small step forward from self-doubt, forward from fear, forward into a space she never thought she would reach. Her touch grew softer, almost like she was telling a secret. The piano responded beautifully, giving her sound a warm glow that filled the air. Then came the most delicate moment of the piece, the quiet drop into the final theme. She played it with full emotion, letting her hands move with a tenderness she only ever shared with her music. It felt like she was opening her heart, one note at a time. She didn't hear any whispers now. No laughter, no doubt. The only sound was the piano and the quiet breaths of those listening. As she neared the end, her chest tightened again, not from nerves, but from a quiet realization. She had made it this far. She had reached a moment she once thought was impossible. The final lines of the melody carried a soft hope, something gentle and full of promise. She played them slowly, letting each note breathe. Her fingers shook a little, but only because of the emotion running through her. She closed the piece with 3 last notes, each one warm and steady. She let the final note linger in the air. Then her hands fell still. The room remained silent. Not a single person moved. Not a chair shifted. Not even a breath seemed loud. And in that stillness, she felt something she had never felt before: complete connection. She didn't know what the audience thought. She didn't know what they would say later. But in that moment, she knew she had reached them. The silence didn't feel like judgment anymore. It felt like awe. It felt like understanding. It felt like the beginning of something she had never dared to expect. The hall was quiet for a long moment after she settled in front of the piano. She could feel the room watching her, the way people look at something they don't expect much from. Some faces showed curiosity, others doubt, and a few carried that same amused expression she had seen earlier when she volunteered to perform. Her hands hovered above the keys, shaking a little. She took in a slow breath, trying to steady herself, but the nerves clung to her like thick fog. She closed her eyes for a moment. She didn't think about the people behind her or the whispers she'd heard when she walked up. Instead, she pictured her small room back home, the one with the old keyboard sitting on a wooden table. She remembered the nights she came home tired, still forcing herself to practice even when her fingers felt stiff. She remembered how she had taught herself slowly, replaying videos, repeating small sections until the notes finally felt natural. And she remembered the promise she made to herself, that one day she would perform in front of real people, no matter how scared she felt. She opened her eyes and let her fingers touch the first key. The sound came out soft, almost fragile, like a whisper testing the air. For a moment she worried that her hands might freeze up. But then she played the second note, then the third, and something inside her began to settle. The sound was calm, steady. It came from a place she knew well, a place she trusted. The room grew still. Even the people who had been whispering earlier grew quiet. They didn't expect much from her, and maybe that helped her. There was no pressure to impress them, only her desire to show what she had carried in her heart for so long. As she moved deeper into the melody, her hands began to relax. The notes flowed more smoothly, guiding her instead of resisting. Her shoulders loosened, and she stopped hearing the creaks of the stage under her feet. All she heard now was the piano and the rhythm she had practiced countless times. The piece she played was something she had worked on for months. It wasn't complicated in the way a professional pianist might choose, but it was full of emotion and depth. It rose and fell like a quiet storm, carrying gentle moments and sharp ones, each meant to say something she couldn't voice out loud. By the time she reached the middle section, her nerves had melted away completely. Her hands were no longer shaking. They moved with purpose, with certainty. She didn't look up, but she didn't need to. She could feel the room shift around her. People sat straighter, leaning in without realizing it. Those who had mocked her earlier now watched with a kind of surprised attention. She was inside the music now, wrapped in it. Every note she played carried the weight of her long nights, her doubts, and her determination. She didn't need applause. She didn't need approval. She needed only this moment, the moment where she proved to herself that she belonged on that stage. The melody softened again, becoming gentle and airy. She let it flow through the room, filling the spaces between the chairs and drifting toward the back rows. It reached people quietly, without force, and that quietness carried its own kind of power. Someone in the audience shifted, then stopped, as if afraid a sudden movement would break the spell. She didn't notice, but the organizer standing near the back did. He had seen many performers come and go over the years, but there was something different about this one. There was no arrogance, no showmanship, only honesty. The final section approached, and she felt her breath catch slightly. This was the part she always struggled with during practice, the part where her timing needed to be perfect. She reminded herself not to rush. She let her hands fall into the rhythm naturally, letting the music guide her instead of forcing it. The notes rose higher, building gently. The sound became fuller, warmer. Her expression softened as she played, her brow no longer furrowed. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing something real. Then came the last few measures. The room went completely still. Even the air felt different, as if everything waited for her to finish. She played the final chord with a calm, steady touch, letting it linger for a moment before lifting her hands from the keys. Silence followed, not the dismissive kind, not the awkward kind, but the silence that comes when people are too surprised to react. She looked down at her hands, breathing slowly, unsure of what to do next. She stood from the bench quietly, not wanting to seem expectant. She didn't know if the silence meant confusion or disappointment. She simply stepped back from the piano and lowered her gaze. Then a single clap sounded from the middle of the room. It echoed lightly, cutting through the silence. Another clap followed, then another. The sound grew, spreading around the hall like a wave. She lifted her head, startled, and saw people rising from their seats, clapping with a mixture of surprise and appreciation. Some looked shocked, others smiled, and a few seemed almost embarrassed that they had doubted her. The applause grew louder, filling the entire hall until it wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with relief. She hadn't come here expecting praise. She only wanted to show what she had carried inside for so long. And now the room understood. The organizer stepped forward, clapping as well. He gave her a small nod that said more than words could. It wasn't pity or politeness, it was respect. She felt a small smile tug at her lips, one she had tried to hide earlier. She bowed her head slightly, grateful, overwhelmed, and unsure how to take all of it in. When the applause finally softened, she stepped off the stage slowly, her legs still a bit shaky, not from fear this time, but from the weight of everything she had just experienced. People she had never met looked at her with newfound admiration. A few whispered to one another, this time not out of mockery but surprise. Some even moved aside respectfully as she walked past. For the first time that day, she felt like she belonged in that room, and deep inside, she knew this moment would stay with her for a long time, not because the audience clapped, but because she had faced her fears, stepped into the unknown, and let her true self be heard. This was the performance that changed everything, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. The hall was still echoing with the last notes she played, a quiet hum that seemed to settle into the walls and into the hearts of everyone standing there. For a long moment, no one moved. She stayed seated at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys as if afraid to break the fragile silence. She didn't know what would come next. The room had once been full of doubt and whispers, and she couldn't be sure the mood had truly changed. She kept her eyes down, not wanting to search the faces that might still hold the same disbelief she had walked in with. Then, all at once, the silence broke. A wave of applause rose from the crowd, soft at first, then growing louder until it filled every corner of the hall. She lifted her head slightly, surprised by the sound. It didn't feel like the polite clapping people offered when they wanted to be kind. It felt real. It felt like they meant it. People were standing, some clapping with wide smiles, others still caught between shock and admiration. A few had their hands over their mouths, as if they had witnessed something they never expected to see. She stood up slowly, unsure how to respond. Her legs felt unsteady, not from fear this time, but from the sudden wash of relief that came over her. She had spent the entire evening bracing herself for rejection, for laughter, for the same dismissive looks she had received when she first entered the hall. But now, she was standing in front of people who had gone still during her performance and were now cheering for her. Not out of obligation but out of genuine respect. One of the older guests came closer, clapping with calm appreciation. He nodded at her in a quiet way that carried more meaning than any loud praise. A younger woman approached next, her eyes shining. She said something soft, maybe a compliment, but her voice got lost in the noise. Even so, the message was clear from her expression alone. Others followed, offering small words and smiles. None of them mocked her now. None of them whispered as she passed. The tone of the room had changed completely, and she could feel it. The organizer walked toward her next. Early in the evening, he had looked unsure about letting her take the stage. Now, he seemed almost relieved that he had. His expression held a mix of apology and admiration. He didn't try to make a big speech. He simply told her that her performance had moved the entire hall, and that he hoped she would come again. His words were steady and honest, the kind that didn't need fancy phrasing to feel meaningful. She nodded, grateful but still overwhelmed. As she stepped away from the piano, she tried to breathe slowly, but her heart was still racing. She was not used to so many eyes looking at her with warmth. She remembered the voices earlier, the ones that told her she shouldn't try, the ones that doubted her ability before she even touched a single key. She remembered each look of disbelief, every soft laugh she pretended not to hear. But now, those looks were gone, replaced with expressions she had never thought she'd see here: respect, surprise, even admiration. A few people who had mocked her earlier approached hesitantly. Their words were awkward, their apologies quiet. Some didn't say anything at all, only giving a small nod that admitted they had been wrong. She didn't feel the need to correct them or remind them of what they said. She had nothing to prove anymore. Her performance had spoken louder than any argument she could have made. She simply accepted their apologies with a small smile. That was enough. They understood. She walked toward the back door of the hall, where the air felt cooler and easier to breathe. She stepped outside and let the night breeze wash over her. The sky above was dark, but the stars were clear, shining quietly, almost as if they were agreeing with everything that just happened inside. She held her hands together, still feeling the faint tremble from the performance. Not from fear this time, but from the feeling of something new beginning. She had spent so long practicing alone, unsure if her efforts mattered. She had played in small corners, in empty rooms, in moments when no one was watching. She had taught herself with patience and determination, not for praise, but because something in her heart felt alive whenever her fingers touched the keys. She never expected that one evening could change so much, but now she knew something important. Her work had value, her music had meaning, and her voice, though spoken through melody rather than words, was strong enough to silence a room. As she walked down the quiet street, she felt lighter than when she had arrived. She didn't need fame or attention. She didn't need to prove herself to people who doubted her. She only needed moments like this, moments where her effort touched someone else, even if just for a few minutes. She thought of the people inside, the way they had listened so intently, how their expressions had shifted as the music grew. They were moved not because she had something to prove, but because the music spoke to them in a way words couldn't. She paused near a small bench and sat down, letting herself fully relax for the first time since she stepped onto that stage. She looked down at her hands, thinking about everything they had done that night. These hands had once been dismissed by everyone who saw her only as someone without talent or importance. But now, after tonight, she knew they were capable of more than people believed. They carried her years of effort, her quiet struggles, her long hours of practice, and her belief in something she couldn't always see but always felt. She stayed there a while, listening to the sounds of the night. A car in the distance, a dog barking somewhere far away, the faint echo of the applause still lingering in her ears. She didn't want to rush away from this moment. It didn't come often. When she finally stood up again, she felt stronger. She felt sure of herself in a way she hadn't before. As she headed home, she carried the memory with her. The doubts she heard earlier no longer mattered. The laughter had faded. What stayed with her was the moment the hall went silent, the moment her music filled the room and changed the way people saw her. She realized that she didn't need to speak loudly or demand attention. She just needed to keep doing what she loved. Her music would speak for her. Her actions would answer the doubts, and her heart would guide her to the next stage. Wherever it might be, she walked with a soft smile, knowing she had turned every doubt into something beautiful. And though the night was quiet now, she felt no silence inside her. She carried a warm strength she had earned note by note. moment by moment, until it shaped her into someone she was proud to be. She didn't need the crowd's approval to keep going, but their reaction that night stayed with her, reminding her that sometimes the world just needs to hear you once to finally see you. She reached the end of the street and looked back only for a second, not out of regret but out of gratitude. Then she continued forward, ready for whatever waited next, knowing she would face it with the same heart that played on that stage and changed the room in ways no one expected, not even her.